for the tasting. And then if you have any questions during our tasting, please put them into the chat function. For those of you who are new, we're going to go through all of the different wines that we're tasting, and then we'll get some feedback at the very end on some of the favorites. And this is our Wine 101 Zoom series. We've got 2 more to go coming up at the end of February. We're going to skip a couple weeks, and we're going to do blind tasting next week, and then we're going to do a chocolate and wine pairing over Zoom the Wednesday before Valentine's Day. And then we're going to finish up with 2 more Wine 101 series in February. And then in March, we're going to go into some staff favorites, and everybody on our team is going to present their favorite wines for us. And then in April, we're going to start back up our guest wine series. We called it our winemaker wine series last year, and we're going to kind of do the same thing, but I don't want to call it winemaker because we'll also have some importers. We'll have some wine specialists from some other distributors, Bobby. We'll have some other personalities from around the wine world on those Zoom tastings. So those will start back up in April and run through the summer, probably till around August. And then hopefully by then we'll be back to in-store tastings. And although we are going to be back to in-store tastings, we're still going to do our Zoom format. We'll probably do it like once a month versus every week. But we will still be doing some virtual tastings even when we get back to our in-store tasting. So lots of fun things coming up this year, even though it's still only January 2021. We are trying to get ahead of the ball game and get ready for a great year of tasting, a great year of discovering new wines, and having fun with each other. So without further ado, let's get started. Wine number 1, tasting sequence real quick. Tatimer is going to be our first. The Hinter de Mer, the Brea Chardonnay will be number 2. Then we'll get into the Dirty and Rowdy, and then we will get into the Rootstock Cabernet. So if you don't have the Tatimer in your glass yet, get the Tatimer in your glass because it is a great way to start a tasting. You know, wines with high acid are always great to have as an aperitif because it gets you ready for the rest of the tasting or for your meal. And this is definitely a high acid wine. So our agenda, we're going to go through wine number 1, and then we're going to hit a few basics on California. Then wine number 2, then things to know when reading a California wine label. Wine number 3, major California wine regions. Wine number 4, and then into the major California grape varietals. As always, shout out to Aaliyah for putting together an awesome slide deck. Thank you for making my job easy on these Zoom tastings. And beautiful landscape. You know, California is near and dear to my heart. It's where I got started drinking wine, the California wine regions and grape varietals. And it's just picturesque. If you've ever been to Napa, if you've ever been to Santa Barbara, if you've ever been to Paso, these areas are beautiful. Mendocino County, and there's just an amazing topography, amazing people, amazing grapes, and amazing stories. So we're going to get right into it. And not that the other countries don't have them as well, but domestically, California is the number 1 producer of wine in the United States, the most well-known producer of wine in the United States. And as we'll find out, because of a couple significant events, it really is right up there on the radar of the great wine regions in the world, even though it's one of the newest wine regions of the great wine regions in the world. So wine number 1, the Tatimer, Hinter de Mer, is from the Central Coast of California. The Central Coast starts down in Santa Barbara County, and then it goes all the way up to San Francisco Bay, right before you get into Napa Valley and the North Coast wine region. So Central Coast is that swath of California between San Francisco and Santa Barbara. And there's a lot of wine in that region. The Santa Cruz Mountains, very underrated and beautiful wine region. San Benito has some really cool places. We've got some wines from Lime Kiln Valley and from Mount Harlan. Monterey, beautiful area and very wide-ranging topography in Monterey. Paso, an emerging wine region, especially for Cabernet and big, rich reds. San Luis Obispo, very little known and very little representation in the market, but there's some great wines coming from it. It's a tiny region, which is why we don't see a lot of those. And then Santa Barbara. So all those make up the Central Coast of California. This is a wine that is a blend of different grapes and different areas across the Central Coast of California. And two of my favorite grapes when it comes to white wines, Gruner Veltliner and Riesling. Most people know these grapes as sweet grapes, but grapes are not sweet or not sweet. Winemakers make wine that is either sweet or dry from grapes. The problem is with these grapes, a lot of the wine regions in Austria and in Germany, they make these grapes into sweet wines because the acid is so bracing that the dry wines need 20 years sitting in the cellar to mellow out enough for you to actually enjoy them and not just get your enamel ripped off from the acid and the sides of your cheeks kind of sucked in like a sour lemon drop. So that's why they leave residual sugar in those wines in the old world, is to offset the intense acidity. In California and in other places that grow these varietals, it's a little bit easier to make a dry version of them because the weather is a little bit warmer, allowing for the acidity to decrease in the grape naturally before the wine is actually made. So if you're in a really cool climate and you're trying to get Riesling ripe, you don't have enough temperature, warmth, sunlight to get it very ripe. So because the sugar level isn't very high, that means the acid level is extremely high, and Riesling's already a high acid grape. California, you can get the sugars a little riper, the acid a little bit lower, and then ferment to dryness, and it's not as aggressive and it's not as intense. Same with New York and the Finger Lakes. Same with Alsace. Their wines tend to be on the dry side for Riesling as well. And in Germany and Austria, there are dry versions of these grapes, but for the most part, they become known as sweet wines. But as you'll find out with this one, Riesling is not sweet, and Gruner Veltliner is not sweet by nature. It's a winemaking style and decision that the winemaker makes when they make the wines. So 80% Gruner, 20% Riesling. Practicing organic on all of the multiple vineyard sites that they're sourcing from. Very, very traditional, very awesome young wine producer. Tatzimer makes a whole line of wines from the Central Coast and a lot of emphasis on Santa Barbara. They do a great Pinot Noir. They do a Rosé. They do some other cool whites and a couple other really cool reds that are available from time to time throughout the year. This wine in particular, the Hinze de Mer, was meant to be a light in a dark place. The winemaker specifically made this wine this year because of COVID. He wanted to make something that was juicy, that was dry, that was refreshing, and that wouldn't cost a lot of money because of kind of what we all experienced this year. So this is his COVID crusher, as he calls it. Whole cluster pressed, meaning the berries are attached to the stems, still on the cluster of the vine. Fermented and aged in mostly stainless with a little bit of small neutral oak, just for mouthfeel. Doesn't impart any extra flavors. It's not going to make the wine really taste different or smell different. It's just going to increase the mouthfeel a little bit. This is amazing with anything Asian. Dry Riesling, Gruner Veltliner, Gewürztraminer, all of those aromatic grape varietals are really fantastic with any kind of Asian cuisine, Korean, Thai, Chinese, anything that fits under that umbrella with the umami, with a little bit of spice. These wines pair really, really well with them and also with a lot of other food because they are so high acid. They're great to start with, but they're also great across the meal and across the board. Fried chicken, yes. Summer salads, tortilla soup, goat cheese, mozzarella. Great on a charcuterie board. Great with also all things shellfish and grilled. Mm. Yep. So juicy fruit, good acid. You feel the acid right back here a little bit in your cheekbones. Dry finish, but you have that really just the juicy fruit continues and continues and continues. I get like orange, tangelo or tangerine. And it feels like I just ate a tangerine. Really, really beautiful. Little floral, some jasmine in there. Aaliyah, thoughts? Lauren, feel free to jump in at any time as well.
This to me, like I always think of it every time I have it, it's like sunshine in the bottle. But today when I'm drinking it, it's like sunshine after a rain and you're in a beautiful field. Like, because I get a little, I don't know why I'm getting a little more green notes today, but it's just that it's bright, which is in the dead of winter. It's very just illuminating and fresh and easy. And obviously, there's a lot of things you can pair with it, or you can just drink it on its own. And I love that about it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, second to Aaliyah, this would be what I call one of my cooking wines, and it's the wine I drink while I'm cooking. It's just got that awesome ripping acid. It reminds me of key lime pie, and I like it so much.
Yes, 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 and yes. All of those things. So $23 in the store. Great for, as we're coming into spring and summer. Riesling's a year-round wine. You can drink it year-round because it goes so great with food. But this on a hot summer day on the pool or at the pool or at the beach or at a concert, if we can go back to those things this summer, hopefully, this is a wine that you should absolutely have in your fridge all the time. Daily drinkers, porch pounders, whatever you want to call them, this is it. So keep it in your glass, pour yourself another sip. If you want to move on to the Brea ahead of time, you can do that as well if this wasn't your cup of tea. And that's the other great thing about wine is, as we'll find out throughout this tasting, everybody will have a different favorite. Some people don't like high acid whites, and that's okay. Some people don't like aromatic whites, and that's okay. If you're usually a Chardonnay drinker or a Pinot Grigio drinker, you're going to be a lower acid white drinker in general. There's always exceptions to the rule. There's people who love everything, but usually we kind of find people lean towards one or the other camp. Either you're a Sauvignon Blanc, dry Riesling, high acid, dry crisp finish white drinker, or you're a little bit fatter, a little bit fuller, a little bit richer, lower acid Pinot Grigio Chardonnay drinker. So this would fit into the latter, the high acid, the Sauvignon Blanc, and the dry Riesling. So California, the stats. First, I want to just take a real quick trip down through all of California's wine regions because they are vast. They're not quite as vast as Italy, and even though Italy's about the same size, Italy has much more land under vine. And if you look at a map of Italy, you see wine regions from north to south in every single area of the country. California, one, it's a little bit more mountainous, so you can't do vineyards everywhere in California. And the other thing is it's a much younger wine region, so we haven't had the chance to expand all of the vineyard areas yet. I would bet that in 20 years, this map is going to look a little bit different, especially with climate change and all the things that are happening with fires. You're going to see some other wine regions emerge, and this map will continue to change and evolve over time. So 2019 wine stats for California. We've got $43.6 billion in retail value of California wine sales domestically. So in the United States, available for retail purchase, California wines represent $43.6 billion, and 70% of that goes to 5 companies. Let that sink in for a little bit. We'll talk about that another day. But even though the wine market in California is huge, 70% of it is owned by 5 companies, which is why we support families, which is why we're drinking the guys that we're drinking today. 242 million cases of California wine shipped domestically. 276 million cases of California shipped around the world. So we're exporting about 34 million cases of wine, as opposed to consuming 242 million cases of California wine domestically. Makes sense. And then 1.36 billion in U.S. wine exports from California. So 43 billion retail wine consumption in California, 1.3 billion exported out of the country for consumption by other countries. Number one wine producer, of course, is California. This is a behemoth of a region, lots of wine being produced. And again, 70% of it owned by 5 companies. California makes 80% of all U.S. wine and is the world's 4th leading wine producer after the 3 previous countries that we've hit: Italy, France, Spain, then comes California.
And it's funny about that because in a lot of the charts that I found just looking around, the statisticians will just list US in general, but they could easily list just California as being the 4th largest producer of wine in the world, which is pretty neat. So this is the short version of all that California has to offer.
Yes, it is. And, you know, California is not stuck in tradition like some of the other countries that we talked about. So the other countries have laws that tell them what they can grow in certain areas, and over hundreds of years have proven Pinot Noir does best in Burgundy, and Cabernet does best in Bordeaux, and Syrah does best in the Rhone Valley, and Sangiovese does best in Tuscany. So they've had hundreds and hundreds of years to figure all this out. And then they created laws to kind of tell people what you should plant in certain areas to protect their branding. California has never had that. California has been much more of a Wild West, is the way a lot of winemakers refer to it. You can do whatever you want, wherever you want. You want to grow Cabernet in Santa Barbara, you can. You want to grow Riesling in Napa Valley, you can. They may not be the best there. There may be other areas that they grow better, but nobody's going to tell you you can't do it. They might tell you you shouldn't do it, but there's nobody that will tell you you can't legally do that. So you can kind of do whatever you want if you're a winemaker in California. 1769, long time ago in U.S. standards, but remember the slides that we were looking at talking about France, Italy, and Spain, and we're talking about BC. So we're going back to 1769 for the United States, which again, long time, but nowhere near the history that the other regions that we've hit on previously have had. So Spanish missionaries, no surprise here, religion brought grapes, and that happens a lot. You know, you see war bring grapes, you see religion bring grapes. Anytime you're trying to share your culture with another culture, the Catholics coming to California, the Mexico-American area, to spread their faith and their beliefs and their Christianity, they bring grapes along with them because they need wine for sacrament. It makes sense. You need wine, religion, wine, very much connected and a part of their own history. So the mission grape was used, also known as País in the rest of the world. We do have some from País in the shop, specifically from Mexico and from Chile, countries that still really focus on País. There's not a whole lot of it grown in California. There is a little bit, and we have had some producers mission wines in the shop, but very small production because not a lot of it is planted anymore. 1840, the first recorded shipment. No, sorry about that, technical difficulties. Of California wine, 1840. So no, my math is going to kill me here. 80 years ago. Yeah, 180 years ago, the first shipment of California wine. He was also the first person to grow Bordeaux varietals and age his wine. So we're moving now from Spanish grapes into French grapes. So other ethnicities and countries begin to spread throughout the United States. And with that, the gold rush, people come to California. French settlers bring some vines with them. Italian settlers bring some vines with them. So we start to see more and more grapes planted in California, and more of a demand because of the gold rush as well. That's in the 1848, 1855 time period. And then 1919, Prohibition happened and killed the California wine industry, or what we knew as the California wine industry. According to a lot of historians, if Prohibition had not happened, we would have way more Italian varietals, because that's what was more popular in the 1800s, than we would have French varietals. So instead of Cabernet Merlot and Pinot Noir being planted, you would have Barbera, Nebbiolo, and Sangiovese widely planted throughout California. But Prohibition killed that, and production dropped 94%. And then when Prohibition ended, that's when a lot of the French grapes started getting planted. Things like Cabernet, things like Chardonnay, things like Pinot Noir. And then probably the most famous moment for California wine in 1976, the Judgment of Paris. This was a blind tasting competition. If you guys haven't seen the movie, oh crap, what's the name of it? Aaliyah, help me out.
Bottle Shock.
Yes, thank you,
Alan
Lauren, Aaliyah.
Rickman and my boyfriend Bill Pullman.
It's an awesome movie. You should check it out if you haven't already. It talks about the Judgment of Paris loosely. It is a fictional, based on historical fact movie, so there are some liberties in there. But for the most part, you get a good story of what happened. There was a French wine writer. He set up this competition, a blind tasting competition, between some of the most famous chateaus and houses in France, pitting them against some of the up-and-comers in California. And the up-and-comers in California won. To the shock of the entire wine world, California beat its French counterparts in a blind tasting. And that's what put California on the map. I mean, it really is. That's what Cabernet took over in Napa, especially Chardonnay as well. That's where the modern history of California wine came from.
And those bottles are in the Smithsonian.
I did not know that. The bottles themselves are in the Smithsonian? Nice.
Yes. The winners got to go, or well, they have a bottle each in the Smithsonian to commemorate this historic event.
I love it. And if you haven't been looking at the chat function, Leah's putting some great reference notes in there for you. There's some websites to go visit if you want to learn more about California wine and a little bit more about the history that we don't have time to go into today. So that's kind of the start of California. Now, we're going to move up the Central Coast a little bit to a place called Monterey. So as with the other wine regions, we wanted to do some popular regions and popular varietals, but with California, that gets really hard because there's so many varietals, and none of them are really native to California. So France, we had a lot of native grapes to choose from. Italy, we had a lot of native grapes to choose from. Spain, we had a lot of native grapes to choose from. And in California, we don't. We didn't do Zinfandel on this tasting. That was one that we could have done. It is kind of a native grape to California, even though it's originally from Croatia. Most well-known in California, so it's kind of become its home. The Mission grape, it's really hard to find anything available right now from California. And so we went with some grapes that are well-known and some grapes that are a little bit less well-known, and went for more of a style of California versus the varietals of California. So we're hitting different styles and we're hitting different regions. And right now we're going to go to Monterey. One of the most polarizing grapes on the planet, Chardonnay. We usually I shouldn't say usually, we don't often put Chardonnay in tastings. And it's not because we don't like Chardonnay. There's some awesome Chardonnays out there. It's because everybody's had a Chardonnay. Almost every single wine drinker that I've ever talked to has tried a Chardonnay. They might be a fan of Chardonnay. They might not be a fan of Chardonnay, but pretty much everyone has tried a Chardonnay. Some people love it. Some people hate it. And what some people love and what some people hate is a specific style of Chardonnay that emerged in California, the oak and butter bomb. If you love it, you're like, yes, give me more oak and give me more butter. If you're not a fan of it, then you're like, stay away from me. I don't want to ever taste another wine like that again. And it can become, as I said, very polarizing. Some people love it, some people hate it. So this is a Chardonnay that's right in the middle. And let's talk about the styles of Chardonnay real quick, because it's a style. There are producers who want to make a huge oaky, buttery Chardonnay, and there are consumers that love that. They do it on purpose, and they do it through extended malolactic fermentation and extended new oak treatment. Those two things are going to create that ultra rich, super buttery, intense Chardonnay. So on the flip side of that is a completely unoaked Chardonnay that has no butter and undergoes no malolactic fermentation. Think of Chablis, think of unoaked Chardonnays from around the world. And then think of kind of right in the middle of that, a little bit of butter, a little bit of oak, really, really well balanced, and very, very versatile. And that's what we're going to be tasting today. So right in the middle of the pack of those two extreme styles of Chardonnay. Monterey is a beautiful wine region that not a lot of people know of. And there's some awesome wines coming out of Monterey. This is the Brea line from Brock Cellars, Chris Brockway. Chris Brockway. I always want to put an A in the middle of his name for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why. But he is Brock Cellars. If you know Brock Cellars, the Cuckoo, the Love Red, the Love Rosé, the Love White, the really fun, cool, unique wines that we get from him from time to time. This is his entry-level line designed for popular varietals. So that's why it's a different label than his Brock series. The Brock wines focus on obscure varietals, things like Trousseau, things like Valdegui, things like Nero de Avila, Peak Pool, Arnace. He created Brea to be a little bit more approachable and to create wines from grapes that people in the U.S. are more familiar with: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet. And that's the focus of this line, just to do those grapes, but do them really well and do them at a great value. So 100% Chardonnay, biodynamically farmed, single vineyard, founded in 1973 in the Santa Lucia Highlands of Monterey. Santa Lucia is a smaller region within Monterey. Let's see if we can find it on that map. I don't know. Yep, here we go. So Santa Lucia Highlands is going to be right here, right where the arrow's pointing. You made it easy for me, Aaliyah. Thank you. So it's a tiny, tiny region. It's that dark purple region within that big swath of not so dark purple. And it's the most well-known region to my knowledge in Monterey, and there's some phenomenal Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays both coming out of there. It's a cooler climate, so the grapes can retain their natural acidity. And this showcases what that acidity can look like in Chardonnay. Direct to press and barrel fermented on native yeast, very important for Brock, aged in neutral French barrels for 8 months. So these are barrels that have been used before. So again, they provide mouthfeel and they provide a little bit of weight and body, but they don't influence the flavor profile of the wine at all. Pair with lobster, scallops, shrimp, poultry, pork, really, really beautifully balanced. I'm going to get into it real quick. And ladies, if you have anything to add while I'm tasting, please feel free to jump in.
In 1000% honesty, I am one of those people that generally feels very polarized about Chardonnay. I don't typically personally prefer an oaky buttery style, and I'm much more of a French style. But this is one that I really enjoy, and not just because I know of Chris and what he's committed to and what he's about, but I just think it's just very elegantly done and very balanced, and one that is very versatile. Like, I think it can please both camps of people, and that's what I really enjoy about it.
Yeah. Mm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is our most popular Chardonnay in the whole store, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
You
I can
are
see
correct.
why.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Aaliyah said, it kind of checks all the boxes because it is so complex, but also really well balanced. It's really delicious.
It is really delicious, and it has what I love about it personally is the acidity of it. You know, acidity in Chardonnay. What happens when you create a buttery Chardonnay is you allow that Chardonnay to go through a secondary fermentation called malolactic fermentation. And in that process, in that fermentation, you're taking the sharp acid and you're converting it into a mellow acid. So you're actually lessening the appearance of acid on the palate. And acid is really important for the palate to maintain balance, to maintain freshness, to not get overwhelmed. And so when you have those really oaky, buttery, rich Chardonnays, and again, nothing against them for the people that love them, we do have some in the store. The natural acid of the wine is softened and mellowed so that the wine can sometimes feel a little bit flabby or a little bit heavy on the palate. And when you retain that natural acidity and you don't undergo through a full malolactic fermentation and you just soften up the acids a little bit, then you have this really well balanced, really beautiful, piercing flavor profile that is really, really delicious with food. So 21 bucks a bottle. We've been having trouble keeping it on the shelf. This replaced our other most popular wine that we don't carry anymore, Starmont. It went through some vintage changes, and we just decided it was time for something new. So we found the Brea, and it has quickly taken over in popularity for the wine that it replaced. And yes, we love Brock Sellers, everything that he does. Aaliyah, can you also put up a link for I can't remember the website that you gave us the other day, the name of it, Know Your Alcohol. Chris Brockway is a part of another, another movement that we've been supporting and trying to get started in the wine industry, which is knowing about additives in wine. So Aaliyah will put that in the chat function when she gets back. Hopefully I'll remind her. Knowyouralcohol.com talks about some of the additives that are happening. And this is part of that kind of issue that I mentioned a little bit earlier, that 70% of California wine is produced by 5 companies. There's a lot of additives in California wine, in those California wines. But then there's a lot of producers like Chris Brockway and the producer that we're going to get to next, Dirty and Rowdy, who are committed to making natural wines in California. So keep this in your glass. We'll talk about some California wine labels. If you're ready for red, you can pour yourself a little bit of the Dirty and Rowdy Mourvedre, and we'll get right into that. So U.S. wine labels are much simpler to figure out than the European counterparts that we've been going through over the last 3 weeks. You don't have to have the DOCs, the DOCGs, the AOCs. It's just region, varietal, and that's really it. Alcohol, percentage stated, and the wineries are all putting the grapes on the label for the most part. There's some blends that don't advertise the grapes that are in the blend, but for the most part, wines in California are going to be varietally labeled. So in U.S. wine classification, what you really need to know is you can have California wine. That's just the broad state appellation, so the equivalent of an IGT or a vin de paix. Then you have AVA, which is American Viticultural Association area. It must contain 85% of the grapes from that area of origin. So to say Napa Valley, it has to have 85% of the grapes coming from Napa Valley. To say Central Coast, 85% of the grapes must come from Central Coast. To say Mendocino, 85% would have to come from Mendocino. And then you have sub-AVAs, non-official term describing an AVA within another AVA. So the example is Oakville within Napa. Napa's the big AVA, Oakville's the sub-AVA. Russian River Valley is the sub-AVA. Sonoma County or Sonoma Valley is going to be the larger AVA listed. Same with Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is going to be the large AVA. Then you've got places like Los Olivos, Santa Rita Hills. Those are going to be the sub-AVAs. So you have the larger areas. I'm going to go back a couple slides just to talk about the larger areas real quick. You have the larger areas, which is Redwoods, North Coast, Sierra Foothills, Inland Valley, Central Coast, South Coast. Those are the broad geographical. And then you have the smaller ones within. So North Coast, you would have Mendocino, Napa, Sonoma. And then within those, you have sub-AVAs as well. And what's happening is you're getting more site specific and you're getting closer to what we would call terroir if you're having them from the sub-AVAs versus the large AVAs. But that's really all there is to know about California wine as far as labels. There's a lot more to know about California wine in general, but as far as labels, that's really it. You have a producer, you have a AVA, you have a vineyard possibly, estate bottled, alcohol, the year it was grown. That's really it. Reserve doesn't mean anything in California, just FYI. Old vine doesn't mean anything legally in California. They can put old vine or reserve on any bottle that they want. It doesn't have to be reserve or old vine. And so the laws are a little bit less strict in California than they are in the old world wine regions, making the labels a little bit easier to navigate. All right. Since we didn't have a whole lot to cover on there, let's get right into the next wine. We are going to be in the North Coast of California for the next two wines. So the first two wines were in the Central Coast of California. Aaliyah, while you were gone, I made a request for you to put knowyouralcohol.com into the chat function so they can check out that as well when we're talking about Mr. Chris Brockway. So now we're going to get into the North Coast of California. There we go. There it is. And in the North Coast of California, this is the most well-known area of California when we're talking about regions. You have Sonoma, you have Napa, you have Clear Lake, and you have Mendocino. Sonoma is so much bigger than Napa, and it's so much more of a diverse wine region than Napa. If you look over here, Napa's the orange, Sonoma's the purple. Sonoma, before the Judgment of Paris in 76, was more popular and more widely planted than Napa. And then after 76, everything moved over to Napa Valley as far as where people were planting, where people wanted to buy property, where the popularity shifted from Sonoma over to Napa Valley. Robert Mondavi was a huge part of that, as well as the Judgment of Paris and the other producers that started coming up in the Napa Valley that I grew up on. When I got back into wine, when I was 18, 19, working at fine dining restaurants, the wine lists that I worked at, the restaurants that I worked at, it was 80% California, and it was Frog's Leap, and it was Stag's Leap, and it was Clos de Vol, and it was Robert Mondavi, and it was all of these people who helped make Napa Valley what Napa Valley is. But we're talking about Sonoma County right now. So I'm going to stop talking about Napa till the next one. And I'm going to go back to Sonoma. So back in that day, it was like Kenwood, Jack London. I remember walking into a wine shop when I was like 21 and dropping $25 for a bottle of Kenwood, Jack London Merlot and thinking that I was the shit. I was drinking some really good wine, and it had a cool label, and it really was delicious back then. And it was a great bottle of wine, and I thought it was fantastic. And Sonoma County is a little bit cooler than Napa Valley, and so you have a much broader range of grapes that you can grow. So this is Dirty and Rowdy. If you haven't poured it in your glass yet, you should, and I need to as well. Dirty and Rowdy, we love these guys. We've been supporting them since we opened the store, right along with Chris Brockway, some of our favorite California natural producers, as we call them. And these guys are a riot, as you can see in that picture up in the top right-hand corner. That's Ed, Hardy and Ed, right? Yeah, Hardy and Ed. It always confuses me every time I say it because of Ed Hardy, the famous clothing line
and perfumery guy, which that was my trademark scent in my early 20s.
Yes, but this is Ed and Hardy, not Ed Hardy, but Ed and Hardy. And it's a cool story. A couple guys, one of them was actually, I think they were both based out of Atlanta. One of them was a food blogger. One of them was a graphic designer. They ended up getting together, having some wine, building a friendship, and decided to go out to California and start a natural winery. They called their winery Get Yourself a Cast Iron Skillet. So even though Dirty and Rowdy is the name of all their labels, if you look on the back, the winery is actually called Get Yourself a Cast Iron Skillet, because who doesn't need to get a cast iron skillet? It does everything for you. It wards off Yetis, like the one on the label. It cooks you eggs in the morning, and 100 things in between. So get yourself a cast iron skillet and start drinking Dirty and Rowdy wines. We get a lot of them through the shop from time to time, very limited production. We get a couple cases of this a year, and then even smaller amount of their higher end wines, the single vineyard stuff. So this is their Familiar Rouge. Now, like Chris Brockway, they decided to focus on little known varietals in California. Instead of focusing on Cabernet and Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, they're focusing on things like Mourvedre and Semillon, Grenache, Syrah, Barbera, Carignan, Chenin Blanc, Peak Pool, a bunch of really great varietals, just not really popular in California. So when we talk about natural wines, we've got to talk about a couple things. The first thing is that they can be a little funky, and the flavor profile can be a little bit different than you may be used to. The next wine that we're going to get into, the Cabernet, is going to be much more your normal, typical wine flavor profile. The natural wines can sometimes be a little bit higher acid, a little bit more, some people describe them as sour. Some people describe them as earthy, as funky, and it can be all of those things. And the reason for that is because of the natural yeast fermentation and the lower alcohol of these wines. Because there's other microorganisms involved in the fermentation process, that's where the funky and the earthy flavors come from. Some people like that. Some people don't like that. So figuring out what your threshold of stank is, as we call it, is a very important part of your wine journey. Some people like a lot of stank. Some people don't like any stink. So where you land is really, really a big part of your own wine journey. So organically farmed grapes sourced from Monterey, Mendocino, San Benito, El Dorado, and Amador counties, which are all located in the North Coast region, even though they are located in Santa Rosa. So their wineries located in Santa Rosa in Sonoma, but then they're sourcing from all over. They do most of their sourcing from Sonoma, but for some of the wines, they're sourcing out of this North Coast, as we call it, area above Napa Valley and above Sonoma County. And so it's coming from a little bit of all of those regions. Also a little bit from the Central Coast in Monterey. That is why you will just see California on this particular label and in this particular bottle. 100% whole cluster, native fermentation, as we talked about. Unfiltered and unfined. Oh man, yeah, these are my kind of wines. I love high acid. I love funky. Love some tannin. Love the balance, the freshness. Unfiltered, unfined. Again, so that means it's vegan. Pair with slow braised, grilled, or stewed meats. Anything coming off the grill. I want it with hamburgers and hot dogs, like a bratwurst in this. Just dynamite pairing. You get that bright cranberry. You get that little bit of spice. I love this wine. Yeah, fried chicken. Yes, Aaliyah, definitely fried chicken. Man.
Well, and also their website seems more, almost arguably more like a love letter to fried chicken than to wine. These guys are like so into fried chicken. It's hilarious because they're originally from this area as well. And so of course they've got good roots for it then, but it's a weird amount of fried chicken references on their wine website. They're just so fun.
Well, and I bet they're using a cast iron skillet to make that fried chicken.
No doubt. No doubt.
So this is Dirty and Rowdy. If you like this style of wine, you need to check out them every time we have them in the store. We will run out of this case very soon. I think there's 4 bottles left on the shelf right now. I tried to get some more for this week, but it's out of stock again. 5 on the shelf right now. So we do have some of their single vineyard higher end stuff, which adds more depth and more complexity to the wines themselves. This one's a little bit lighter, a little bit fresher. The other ones are fresh too, but this one's just the lightest in style that they do every year. Also, the entry level and the largest production that they do. We sell it for $33 a bottle. And again, just dynamite. Ladies, if you have anything to add on Dirty and Rowdy, please feel free to hop in.
I think the big thing for me is, and this goes into my wine journey through being at Fermented, I think we had some Dirty and Rowdy pretty early on when I started here almost 2 years ago. And I was like, what is this? But now I love it. This to me is a true go-to because it starts really bright, but then it's got a backbone that I think gives it a lot of, and I know everybody who's regularly on these is probably tired of me saying this word, but versatility for food pairing purposes. And I just love it. I love that it's unfiltered and these guys are hilarious. So, you know, you're supporting people with character, people that have got a lot of personality and that are trying to make wines in a way that not everybody's made wines before. And just the fact that they would give Mourvedre its day as its own grape when usually that grape is reserved for blending purposes. I just love that. So shining their light on some under-recognized grapes, I think is really cool.
Agreed. Yeah, I love Mourvedre. We also have some Mourvedre from France in the store. It's a really cool grape and a great alternative for Cabernet drinkers. Maybe not this one because it's a little bit of a lighter style from Mourvedre even, but some of the ones that we have from France, a little bit fuller, a little bit richer. Some people have described Mourvedre as a wild Cabernet. You get the fullness and the richness of Cabernet, but it's a little bit more wild and it's a little bit more, wild's the best way to describe it. All right, wine regions of California. Now, I bet we're going to see a familiar trend, and that is the largest production regions not being the ones that we recognize the most. And why is that? Everybody at once, bulk wine. So the bulk wine regions are generally the regions that nobody's heard of because they don't make good wine. That's why all the grapes that are produced in those regions go into bulk wine. They're not suitable for grapevines. They're on the valley floor, not the hills. They're in fertile soil, not non-fertile soil. Grapevines do better when they have to struggle, and they do better in soil that's not fertile and doesn't allow you to grow 50 tons of grapes per acre. So in these bulk wine regions, they're vastly irrigated. They're farming for quantity over quality. And that's why in all of these wine regions, the ones that produce the most are not the ones that we know the most about, because they don't put these regions on the labels into bulk wine. They just put California and they just put 2 Buck Chuck on the label. And that's where these grapes are coming from. And that's where those grapes are going. So Fresno, how many people have had a wine from Fresno? Probably not very many, unless you have been in California and you're in Fresno at a local vineyard. Kern, how many people have had a wine from Kern?
I didn't even
Tulare.
know Kern was a thing.
I know. How many people have had a wine from Tulare? And we'll go down the list. Kings, Madera, Merced, Sacramento. Okay, maybe. Yolo. Actually, there's some good wines coming from Yolo. San
So
Joaquin
you've heard
Valley.
of Yolo?
Yeah. Heard
I
of
thought
Yolo.
that was made up. It's like, that's a very 2020 thing to name your city.
It does mean you only live once,
Yes.
but it is also the name of a wine region.
Well, they've got a built-in hashtag to get them
They do.
lots of.
I don't think they're taking advantage of it right now.
No.
San Joaquin Valley, Alameda County, San Luis Obispo, that tiny region down there in San Luis Obispo, making that much wine because most of it's going into bulk. Yuba, Monterey. Okay, now we finally got to a wine region where we're talking about a wine region. Lake County, Mendocino, Shasta actually makes some cool wines. Santa Barbara, Solano, Santa Clara, Sonoma, Napa, and then Riverside. So again, what we see is that the wine regions that we know of tend to produce the least amount of wine, and that's because they're producing for quality, not quantity. And so even though they're producing less than these other regions by volume, and this is how many yields per acre. So that's a great graph. You're getting 14 tons an acre on average in Fresno. In Napa, you're getting on average 3 tons per acre. That's a huge difference in the amount of grapes grown per acre of land. And in grape growing, the less grapes there are, the less competition there is for nutrients, equals more complex wines. The more grapes there are per vine cluster, the more competition there is for nutrients, the less complexity these grapes have. So you get grapes from Fresno and you have to add a bunch of stuff to the wine to make it taste good because you're getting 14 tons per acre versus 3 tons per acre. That goes back to our 70% problem. 70% of California wine, these regions coming from 5 major companies, manipulating heavily, putting over 76 legal additives into wines, putting fake powder and tannins and coloring into wines, putting fake flavors into wines. All of these things are what is leading you to headaches, what is leading you to hate California wines, and what makes all of the wines that you find in the grocery store taste exactly the same. I have not personally purchased a wine in the grocery store for over 10 years. I haven't owned Fermented for over 10 years, but I have not bought a wine from a grocery store in over 10 years. And it's the same reason I haven't gone to McDonald's in over 10 years. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong if you like McDonald's. I'm not saying if there's anything wrong if you buy a cheap wine from the grocery store every now and again.
But I need to hear you say it about Wendy's.
I have gone to Wendy's in the last 10 years. Yes, I have gone to Wendy's. Fresh, never frozen patties of 100% real American beef make a difference versus soy patties that are frozen and chicken nuggets that are made from other chicken parts.
Thank
So
you.
yes,
We may continue to work together. It's
there
fine.
there is a distinction for some of the fast foods. Now, I'm not going to go on a tirade because I could go on for hours and hours and hours. But my point is, know what you're drinking, support people who care, come to Fermented to find your wines. That's all I'm saying. All right, and now on to wine number 4. We have Rootstock Cabernet. So we had to do Cabernet, Chardonnay, the two most popular grapes from California. Even though they're not originally from California, originally they're from France, and we know that. Chardonnay grown in Burgundy, Cabernet grown in Bordeaux, also in the Loire Valley. And Cabernet in Napa Valley can be a wide range of different things. Just because most people know Cabernet is big and rich and powerful, it doesn't mean it always is. Just like most people know Riesling as being sweet. It's not because Riesling is sweet. It's because of the way the winemaker chooses to make the wine. Cabernet is a bigger grape by its DNA composition, and it does make a fuller bodied wine, but that doesn't mean that it always has to be a 15% high alcohol, gigantic, hit you in the face wine. You can have elegant Cabernet at 12.5, 13% alcohol, and it still tastes really, really beautiful, and it still be powerful, even though it's a powerful elegance. I think that's a new descriptor we need to use in the store. Powerful elegance. So this is Rootstock project by Wilson Daniels, and this is coming out of Napa Valley, and this is Cabernet Sauvignon with a tiny bit of Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. But Adam, it doesn't say those things on the label. How is that so? That is so because in California, to be varietally labeled, it only has to be 75% of the grape. So that's why a lot of people have a sneaking suspicion that not only does Meiomi contain Mega Purple, which we know, it also probably contains some Zinfandel and some Syrah and some other big grapes, but it can say Pinot Noir on the label because it only has to be 75% Pinot Noir. Same with Cabernet. It only has to be 75% Cabernet. A lot of times, the Cabernet you're drinking actually has these other grapes blended into it. We call them Bordeaux varietals, and we call this a Meritage. It's a Bordeaux style wine using the Bordeaux grapes made from California. So 82% Cabernet, and that's what it says on the label. And then you have the other supporting parts in there. Sourced from parcels in Yountville, Stag's Leap, St. Helena, and Rutherford. Those are all smaller AVAs within the Napa Valley district. So if we come over here, you'll see all of these different regions to the right here. There's Yountville, there's St. Helena, Stag's Leap. So some of the more well-known regions within the Napa Valley sub-AVAs, 20 months in 100% French oak, with 14% being new. So this is kind of right in the middle of what we would call the traditional Cabernet from France and the modern Cabernet from California. The traditional wine from France would have a little bit higher acid, a little bit more tannin, and just a little bit less fruit than this. The modern counterpart would have much more fruit, much less acid, and be even bigger and richer. So this is a great middle of the road Cabernet. It's got balance, it's got weight, it's got power, it's got a little bit of structure to it, even though it's a softer on the back end. And it's a great value too, $25 a bottle. It is next to impossible to find a Napa Valley Cabernet at $25 a bottle. So if you like it, come on back for it. It's a great little find. It's new to the store in the last couple weeks. Again, it's a Wilson Daniels project. Wilson Daniels is a family-owned importer who also has their hand in some California properties as well. They also have our Pralius and Chateau Volpaia. We also get from this importer. So they support great families. It is a larger production wine in the scheme of Dirty and Rowdy, Brea, things like the ones that we have tasted in the past that are much, much smaller production, but really, really solid for the money. Pair it with grilled lamb, portobello mushrooms, beef short ribs, anything that's going to have some richness and some weight to it. This wine is going to do really, really well with. Yeah, I am having trouble. There we go. All right. And then, of course, blue cheese and filet mignon. I almost missed.
This like truly, so this is for the team or the group. This is my first time trying this wine. And usually these days, because I tend to be preferring a more natural style, I'm a little skeptical of the Napa Cab, but this is really lovely balance. And truly, my goodness, do I want a blue cheeseburger with this so desperately.
Yep.
And I know I want that like anyway all the time, but I think this is a really beautifully done Napa Cab, and it's really cool to see that. And I think if you guys look into rootstock, the root, yes, it's ROUT, and they're referring to the major thoroughfares through each of those regions that they're finding their wines with. So they do, I think they have an Oregon Pinot as well, and another California Chardonnay, and this is the Route 29 Napa thoroughfare, which is kind of cool, kind of special, and I'm into this.
Nice.
Great question, Lisa. No, they don't serve a blue cheeseburger at Wendy's, but we all wish that they would.
They should.
Oh, wait, that was probably a Steven question, wasn't it? Okay.
All right. Major wine grape varietals in California. We'll go through this real quick because it should be pretty self-explanatory and not a ton of surprises here. Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, number 1 and number 2. Zinfandel, Pinot Noir, French Colombard. That might surprise some of you. Merlot, Pinot Gris, Roubiard, Muscat of Alexandria.
Ruby Red. Ruby Red is one of the few grape varietals that have red pulp.
Ruby Red?
Ruby Red.
I've never even heard of that.
It's used for making fruit snacks, so I'm not really sure why they included it here.
Yeah.
Best craft I could find.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It's probably a table table grape, but it is
a mixing grape for bulk wine, honestly.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That is exactly what I expected. The one surprise for me is the Pinot Gris, because you actually don't see a lot of Pinot Gris varietally labeled from California. So that makes me think that a lot of that is going into the bulk wine production as well.
Well, and that's why I was surprised about Muscat of Alexandria as well. Yep. But this is a 2018 graph, to be fair.
Well, but the Muscat doesn't surprise me because that could be used a lot in the bulk wine as well. It's a very hardy grape that you can grow very easily, and some of the flavor profiles are what you will find in your $2 Chuck Whites. All right, real quick, we're gonna do our favorites, and then we're gonna wrap this up. Sorry, I went a little bit long this evening. I could talk about California forever. Even though I love the other regions, and Italy is my personal favorite. I've spent a lot more time in California wine and getting to know California wine, and it really is an outstanding region that has some superstars that are still up and coming. So put your favorite into the chat function. Aaliyah will add it up and tell us who the winner is. I got to figure out, actually, I know which one mine is. It's a no-brainer for me. I love Dirty and Rowdy so much. I could drink that wine every single day for the rest of my life and be okay with it, as long as it was different vintages. All right.
I'm surprised to say that I am also confident today because, as we all now know, I rarely am. I too will be voting Dirty and Rowdy for today.
And Trina, yes, there is a lot of white wine coming from Napa Valley, but there is a ton of red wine coming from Napa Valley as well. Any other?
Thank you. We learned something tonight.
Oh,
A
good.
lot we learned.
Are there any other questions that I may have missed in here? I think Aaliyah got to everything we needed to.
I think we just need Lauren's vote.
Lauren, where are you
We'll
at?
have everybody.
What about Bobby? Did he taste any of these or did he disappear?
Oh.
He disappeared, but he
That's
probably
okay.
would have voted for the Dirty and Rowdy because he likes you.
It's not about me. It's about these guys. All right. Aaliyah, what's our tally?
Well, it's a close one, another close week, but the Brea Chardonnay has pulled ahead with the Dirty and Rowdy Mourvedre at second and the Tatimer at third.
I love it. The Napa Cabernet came in last. What a crazy surprise. What happened?
No, nothing. I got you, Kim. I
Nice.
counted both you and Trina for number 2.
I love it. I love it.
Yay!
We couldn't handle the dirty and rowdy stankiness.
That's all right. Now you know.
It
Too
tastes
healthy.
Yeah, it tastes amazing. It really does. But it reminded me of my mother's pickled eggs.
Love that. I love
And I
that.
love
And
the description,
very,
too healthy. Too
very
healthy.
natural, like pickled eggs, too.
I demand a
Yes.
recount.
I demand a recount.
Even wants a recount. Well, again, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you
This
had
was
fun.
so fun.
I hope you learned something. I hope that you come back and see us again on another Zoom tasting coming up. Have an awesome rest of your Wednesday night, an awesome rest of your week. If you want any of these wines, you know where to find them, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adam.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Aaliyah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.